A skeleton wearing a checkered shirt surfaced from the waters of a deserted island, with few to no hints. The remains washed up on Spencer Island, carrying a sinister mystery that has baffled detectives for years. The body was buried by the sheriff's office on the grounds that it was a cold case. However, as time goes on, the man would speak from the dead and give his identity 44 years later. Hello and welcome back to Mystery Detective, where we explore the most engrossing stories of murders that have been solved and unsolved, as well as dark secrets from all around the world.
In the late 1970s, a terrifying discovery occurred on the outskirts of Spencer Island in the middle of the rapidly expanding suburban environment of Marysville, Washington. This peaceful location, well known for its stunning variety of shorebirds and ducks, ended up serving as the unexpected location for a terrifying occurrence that would forever haunt the neighborhood of Marysville. As the natives gathered on the Spencer Island in search of consolation in the peace that bird viewing offers, an unwary duck hunter approached the island's shore, unknowing of the tragedy that waited for him. It happened on January 3, 1979. In the early morning, the previous week's temperature had been below freezing, and by January 3rd, the air finally felt a little bit warmer. A few residents of Marysville decided to have some serene moments at Spencer Island. Among these residents was a desperate duck hunter who entered the barren abyss in search of a catch, despite the icy winter of 1979. At that point, he had no idea that fate had another surprise in store for him. He came out of the depths and witnessed something that was nearly surreal. A horrifying image appeared before his eyes. The mysterious island's bleak tidal flats were plagued by a ghostly skeleton that looked like a Halloween decoration and was tragically caught in a web of fishing line. In the Snohomish River Delta, a shoe, a leg bone, and a pair of tan pants were found together in an odd grouping by a 12-foot wooden piling. The hunter's focus was then caught by a red checkered shirt next to a downed cedar. Soon after, he made the startling discovery of a skull, ribs, and another black leather shoe with a foot inside. The scene was nothing less than a terrifying riddle that needed to be solved. The hunter called the police right away to report what his eyes had witnessed. When officers arrived, the red, orange, gray, and white checkered clothing was identified by detectives working on the case. A human skull and a shoe with a foot still inside were lying 5 feet apart. While keeping in mind all these horrifying facts, detectives also discovered a belt in a size 33 or 34 and a pair of lace-up shoes in a size 8. The rubber heels of the shoes were imprinted with the O'Sullivan logo. The khaki pants tag stated that they were made in the USA. These discoveries provided crucial information for the man's identity. His leather wallet was also discovered, although it was empty of cash and identification. The victim seemed to have passed away many months prior.
From the point of discovery onward, the victim was identified by the sheriff's office as John Doe 79-1. Due to the skeletal remains decomposition, it was impossible to ascertain the cause of death. At the time, there were no dental records that could be matched to the body. The body was buried in Cypress Lawn Cemetery a few months later, on March 15, 1979, by the Cassidy Funeral Home. Because there wasn't much technology available at the time, unexplained bodies were frequently buried. In the past, DNA technology wasn't as developed. Therefore, human remains weren't stored in the medical examiner's office until they were identified or claimed. Since nobody in the neighborhood was reported missing, there was no chance of identifying this body. The need to identify the body became less urgent as the years went by. The investigation quickly went cold and was forgotten. In 2008, a team of detectives started revisiting unresolved or unexplained crimes in Snohomish County. Many of these cases were solved thanks to developments in DNA technologies. In an effort to locate and identify 1979 John Doe through DNA samples, the team sought to exhume the deceased's remains. However, the examination itself and the considerable documentation required to secure permissions for the excavation can make the entire procedure take years. John Doe was unaware and unaffected by all that was happening above his grave. 7 years later, in 2015, the remains were finally excavated from Cypress Lawn, under the supervision of the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office team and the Medical Examiner's Office. This came about after many years and a lot of paperwork. After the body was moved to the Medical Examiner's Office, he was then identified as Spencer Island Doe. That same year, in 2015, in an effort to identify Spencer Island Doe by his teeth, forensic dentist Dr. Kyle Tanaka had collected his dental radiographs, charted his teeth, and uploaded the information to the National Crime Information Center. The National Crime Information Center is the FBI's computerized index that covers both criminal cases and instances involving missing persons. It enables law enforcement officials in other parts of the country who lack jurisdiction to find a match for their victim or prospective suspects. This effort, however, was in vain. The teeth of this unidentified body were just unmatchable. Natalie Murray, a very accomplished forensic artist, was given the case in April 2016, and within a month, Natalie had successfully taken measurements, taken photos, and rebuilt the face of Spencer Island Doe using sketches and drawings. She based her reconstruction on facial morphology to provide a sense of how the victim must have appeared in real life. By securing rubber pegs to the skull in all the gaps, Natalie rebuilt the face. She then imagined what he may have looked like. His flat cheeks and small nose appeared typical of people with Asian ancestry. In order to imagine him at the moment of his disappearance, she sketched him from the shoulders up wearing the same red checkered shirt. The basic plan was to have someone recognize the face from the sketch. While Natalie worked on the sketches, the skeletal remains of Spencer Island Doe were examined by Dr. Kathy Taylor, a forensic anthropologist from Washington State, at the King County Medical Office. She determined that they may have belonged to a Caucasian adult male between the ages of 21 and 61 who stood between 5 feet 2 and 5 feet 6 inches tall. The bones were not broken, but the leg's fractured femur had a poor healing outcome. In actuality, the largest bone in the human body is the femur. The man would have had continuous discomfort for some years, because an X-ray showed that the central part of his torso was protruding like the claw of an ice scraper. Detectives made the observation that they had never witnessed a fracture heal in such a manner, which prompted them to make the assumption that the individual may have chosen not to seek medical attention at all or had lived in a third world nation with no access to medical care. Since there were no definitive solutions, Jane Jorgensen, an investigator at the Medical Examiner's Office, was perplexed by the circumstance. It is improbable that the man would not have sought prompt medical attention, which is offered for free in many nations, even if he was homeless at the time of his death. It raises the question of why this man endured such agonizing anguish while remaining in silence. The individual also had 2 missing front teeth on his left side and 2 missing molars, both of which appeared to have been lost before he passed away, because the sockets had fully healed. Investigators were perplexed as to why the man had not received immediate assistance for his leg after discovering that he had a gap in one of his teeth and 3 teeth with alloy fillings, which suggested that the man had sought medical care at some point in the past. Regarding the circumstances surrounding the man's existence and eventual passing, the detectives felt confused and puzzled. Had he endured torturous treatment? Officers noted that he might have been a prisoner as well because prisoners have access to dental care. But even if he had a limp and hypothetically had missing teeth, why wouldn't anyone recall this man? Due to the fracture, this person might have been 2 inches shorter on one side and would have had to walk with a limp. Did anyone not remember seeing a man limping around town? After much publicity, A former police officer from the 1970s reported to the police that he remembered seeing a man walk with a limp in the town in the late 1970s, but he couldn't remember his name. This provided access to medical records, but there was a significant age of ambiguity. He might have been a fisherman, and he might have either perished or been buried at sea by his companions. In September 2018, the University of North Texas Health Sciences Center received a portion of the victim's femur. It was then subjected to additional DNA extraction testing and uploaded to CODIS, a database used by the FBI to identify samples based on forensic genealogy. The institution was able to obtain mitochondrial DNA and SDR pictures in March of the following year. But because there were no matches, the results were inconclusive. The officers persisted nonetheless. They simply had to come up with alternative ways of identifying Spencer Island Doe. By 2018 and 2021, using a combination of circumstances, including short tandem repeat testing and dental records, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office investigators ruled out a number of missing people as probable matches. They did, however, begin a collaboration with Offerming in 2021 to develop a sophisticated DNA profile that may be utilized for investigative genetic genealogy to solve their unresolved cold cases. Through this collaboration, a number of unsolved cases have been successfully identified and solved. By January 2021, Offerming had received a portion of the femur for DNA extraction. DNAsolves.com provided funding for the entire endeavor, in the anticipation that the technology will one day lead to the identification of the Spencer Island John Doe. In other words, it made it much simpler to narrow down probable descendants when the search was reduced from 1,000 persons to 100. A DNA profile was successfully created in May 2021, and the collected DNA was sufficient for forensic-grade genome sequencing. Spencer Island Doe's race was finally verified as being Caucasian. Anyone trying to trace their own family history or locate long-lost relatives follows this same procedure. Investigating police constructed family trees from numerous stop matches and discovered a male who had gone missing in Everett, Washington, in the late 1970s. Finally, the Spencer Island John Doe was identified. He went by the name Gary Lee Haney. The 29-year-old had vanished in the late 1970s, but either no one reported him missing or the records were mismanaged. In any case, the skeletal remains now had a name thanks to the DNA match with his half-sister. The chief medical examiner formally identified the descendant as Gary Lee Haney on February 10, 2023. The cold case was ultimately solved after 44 years. On September 23, 1950, Bernice Schaefer, Gary Lee Haney's mother, gave birth to him. When Gary was still a little child, Bernice divorced his father and remarried in 1955 to an Air Force officer by the name of Sheldon Lee Haney. Gary was adopted by his stepfather, who also legally altered his middle name. This young man and his parents were able to explore the globe. Gary was a fan of the Beatles and reportedly had excellent hand-eye coordination when playing the piano. Thane, Gary's 71-year-old cousin, assisted in putting together a variety of recollections and details regarding Gary's life. He maintained records for the large, dispersed family. A couple black and white pictures showed the dark-haired Gary clutching a large dog's leash. His mother is with him and wearing a stylish outfit, and his stepfather is dressed well. The images depict the boy's life, including a photo from his school. The family relocated to New York from Kansas. The Haneys were always away when the family would gather for a celebration every year. Thane has a faint recollection of Gary behaving slightly differently because of some sort of mental condition. The youngster actively hallucinated as an adult, which may have been caused by schizophrenia, but it also could have been autism. Gary's biological father, Joseph Condamati, passed away at the Missouri Veterans Hospital when Gary was 16 years old. 3 years later, his mother passed away. Gary Haney never got to meet his half-siblings either. His stepfather likewise completed his military service and began working as a commercial pilot for Boeing when Gary's real parents passed away. From the early 1970s through at least 1990, Sheldon Lee Haney resided in the Everett, Washington area. Gary may have lived with his stepfather since he was the only living relative he had. Sheldon Haney occasionally had a wandering lifestyle after retiring. He liked traveling by road to Baja California in Mexico during the winter, although it's obvious that he had little responsibility. Perhaps the weather was too cold for the man. Is it possible Gary was an independent? Thane then recalled that his uncle had visited him in Texas somewhere in the middle of the 1980s. His nephew, Gary, was never brought up or addressed by him. According to certain documents, Gary was residing in a boarding home, and according to Social Security, he passed away on Christmas Eve in 1976. However, given that no living relatives listed him as dead, disputed this fact, investigators suggested that Sheldon and Gary may have quarreled or that he may have moved out on his own. In any event, Sheldon Haney couldn't locate his grown-up stepson. However, it should be emphasized that the paper record keeping back then was not as comprehensive as it is now. Recent investigators who looked into the matter did not discover a missing person report. As a result, it's likely that the documents were misplaced before being converted to digital format. Sheldon Haney passed away in 1997 without knowing where his stepson was. Despite careful examination, after so many years, there was still no conclusive proof of foul play. Their research led detectives to the conclusion that Gary might have been carried away by the river current and eventually ended up where he was discovered, or he might have drowned close to where he was discovered, with suspected explanations ranging from drowning to a head injury or a medical issue. The precise cause of death is still shrouded in mystery. Thane has no idea what his cousin looked like as an adult other than the pictures from their childhood. He planned to erect a monument or gravestone where Gary was discovered. It seems that after 44 years of detours and turns, the answers to this case have only raised new queries. What specific details surround Gary's passing? There was no known cause of death and no hint. The Spencer Island doe, at least, have a name and some sort of resolution. A group of hikers in Tennessee discovered a dead body on December 22, 1974, while using a shortcut close to the Ober Mountain Aerial Tramway, then known as the Gatlinburg Ski Lodge Tramway. The woman's corpse was found next to a tree, face down on her cloak, as if she had been sitting there moments before her untimely demise. The most puzzling part is that it took almost 50 years to identify a woman who went by only Jane Doe, with the body not being identified until 2023. According to the initial forensic reports, she was estimated to be about 35 years old when she passed away. How could it have happened that she ended up in this isolated place? How come it took nearly 50 years to identify this victim? Hello and welcome to Mystery Detective, a channel dedicated to delving into the murky mysteries surrounding both cold and solved cases worldwide. Tennessee is to the east of Gatlinburg, praised for its astounding natural beauty. It is well known as a gateway town, surrounded by the magnificent Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Despite being rather expensive, Gatlinburg has maintained its cozy, family-friendly atmosphere over the years. This quaint mountain community with a resort feel is well known for its rich history, excellent shopping, and stunning scenery. With only 3,800 residents, Gatlinburg might seem like a small town. However, beneath its lovely exterior, The location hides mysteries that have been kept secret for a very long time. It was December 22, 1974. A chilly morning in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. A bunch of Georgian friends made the decision to go hiking in a remote area that isn't often visited. They chose to go to their chalet by a shorter route. As they strolled along the lonely trail, something unexpected caught them off guard. At Gatlinburg Ski Lodge, under the tramway station, were found the remains of a woman. Beside a tree, she lay face down on an open cloak as if she had been sitting there prior to her untimely demise. The state of affairs was appalling, and the remains had decomposed to such an extent that it seemed impossible to identify her. As they attempted to make sense of the startling discovery, many questions raced through their minds. The men knew they needed to report this to the police. Facing such a terrifying discovery, they quickly called the Gatlinburg police, hoping for a prompt response to look into this horrific circumstance. What they found was a horrifying enigma, a riddle with no clear answers. Identification was nearly impossible due to the decomposition of the dead body. There were no obvious hints discovered in the area or close to her body that would have indicated who she was or how she died. This woman seemed to have been consumed by the remoteness of the place. Authorities encountered an investigation that appeared to grow more intricate by the minute as they started their probe. Her remains, when found, revealed that she had passed away approximately 2 months prior to their discovery. The investigators later referred to this woman as Jane Doe because they had no idea who she was. According to the assessment, Jane Doe was 5'8" tall, white, and between 30 and 45 years old. Her weight was about 140 pounds. Her hair, which was cut short and had a blonde and brown combination, was found mostly near her remains. When Jane Doe was found, she had no shoes on and was only wearing short brown men's socks. Beside her, her sweater and coat were neatly laid out. She wore extra-large male-like marquee slacks, a white short-sleeved shirt with yellow flowers, and a white button-down sweet tree sweater. There was no finding of any jewelry or other personal items she might have had on her at the time. In the absence of immediate identification, authorities turned to the resources at their disposal. Both her DNA and dental records were available for potential future research. Her fingerprints were regrettably unusable, which increased the mystery surrounding her case. Identifying Jane Doe's body proved to be a challenging task for Sevier County Medical Examiner Dr. John Hickey. Given the complexity of the situation, Dr. Hickey sought assistance from the state's forensic anthropologist, William Bass. They consented to have the body brought to the hospital mortuary for an autopsy. The investigation into Jane Doe's unexplained death commenced, and case number 74-11 was assigned to it. The goal of the autopsy was to determine what caused her death. Regretfully, the report did not provide a conclusive cause of death, despite the best efforts of the medical professionals. Although this finding eliminated the possibility of foul play, it raised more questions about Jane Doe's demise. In January of 1975, the hunt for the identity of this enigmatic woman intensified. Investigators put in a lot of overtime, contacting neighboring states such as South Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia, and writing letters to different police departments. The TBI and FBI were contacted to offer support. They searched for clues to her identity, but were unable to find any, which led to a depressing stop. Investigators were baffled by the Jane Doe mystery for years. They created a composite image of her face in 2007 using computer technology. The investigators were able to get a glimpse of her actual appearance thanks to this incredible reconstruction. Her height, weight, hair color, and eye color were all calculated in the hopes that this composite would help someone remember her and help identify her. But when this new lead failed to yield a breakthrough, investigators' hopes were dashed again. And faced by the persistent challenges, they looked into a state-of-the-art identification technique in 2007. By utilizing the dental identification system of the National Crime Information Center. Jane Doe's identity remained a mystery in spite of this. It seemed that the case would never be resolved. In an effort to find out the truth, the case was reported to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Systems. The identity of Jane Doe remained a mystery for decades despite constant investigation. Consequently, this case eventually turned cold, just like a lot of others. Detective Cindy Myers of the Gatlinburg Police Department took on this case in 2021. Myers had been plagued by the mystery of the mysterious Jane Doe for a considerable amount of time. Even after years of intensive research, she wasn't sure the mystery would ever be unraveled. But Detective Myers was determined to revive the cold case even though she knew that technology had advanced significantly since the 1970s. Othram, a specialized laboratory in Texas, renowned for its proficiency in forensic genetic genealogy testing, was the place Detective Myers turned to for answers. A U.S.-based company called Othram focuses on utilizing genetic genealogy to crack cold cases, like unsolved murders and disappearances. Through the use of single nucleotide polymorphism and short tandem repeat testing, they provide law enforcement agencies with the instruments and techniques necessary to ascertain family ties among victims, regardless of how closely or distantly related they are. They also offer DNA forensic genome sequencing as one of their services. Jane Doe's skeletal remains were carefully transported to Othram's lab, where a thorough examination was conducted. A thorough DNA profile was created by Othram's experts using forensic-grade genome sequencing. The DNA profile was utilized by Othram's genetic genealogy team to locate potential Jane Doe relatives. They carefully pieced together a likely connection to the unidentified woman, following each lead that led them down a convoluted path through public records and family trees. It was a challenging process that required perseverance and unwavering concentration. February of 2023 brought rewards for their efforts. Officials from Othram called Detective Cindy Myers with some startling information. They had found a possible DNA match to an Arkansas-based woman. Investigators traveled to find this woman, and they learned an incredible fact. She disclosed that her sister had vanished in August of 1974, with the last known sighting occurring in Tennessee. This discovery allowed for the critical piece of the puzzle to be assembled. The woman in Arkansas promptly provided a DNA sample, which was then submitted for direct comparison with Jane Doe's remains. Finally, after all these years, the result was known. Charlotte Roberta Henry, who was only 35 years old when she passed away, was positively identified as Jane Doe. She was the sister of the individual whose DNA was obtained for comparative analysis. On January 4, 1939, Charlotte Roberta Henry was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to Paul and Roberta. Her sister's name remains unknown, but she had a brother named Paul Henry. What is known about her early years is scarce. She had blonde-brown hair, hazel eyes, and was about 5 feet 8 inches tall. We don't know anything about her marital status or if she had children. The only thing that is known for sure is that her family last saw her at her father's funeral in April of 1974. All communication with her abruptly stopped after that terrible incident. Her family didn't receive a letter from her until August of that year. The family had no idea that this would be the last letter they would receive from her. The authorities never wavered in their quest for answers, and the confirmation of Jane Doe's identity as Charlotte Roberta Henry was a momentous occasion. They have now received closure on this protracted case. Although the reason for Charlotte's passing and the events leading up to it are still unknown, her identification ends a nearly half-century-long mystery. The Gatlinburg Police Department's investigative division has received praise from Police Chief Randy Brackens for their unwavering commitment to solving this case. Over the years, a number of detectives in our investigative division have worked this case to ascertain Miss Henry's identity. Despite a tragic conclusion, the revelation provides much-needed peace to Miss Henry's sister, who had been living in constant uncertainty for almost 50 years about her sister's whereabouts. Now that the family has answers thanks to the investigators' persistence, the situation's ongoing tragedy can be put to rest. Though it is impossible to claim that this poor victim received justice, at least this tragic case was resolved when it appeared impossible at first. What do you think happened to Charlotte Roberta Henry? Let us know what you think by leaving a comment.